for pointing that out. We are
I
now.
gotta throw that back out. That was actually Jason that ended up calling and asking, like, hey, is it gonna be recorded tonight?
Thank you, thank you. All right, so I did see somebody's hand was up. Let's see who that was. Somebody.
That was me, actually, Paige. I was
Oh.
going to ask if it was going to be recorded and if we're going to have access to it afterwards.
Okay, yes, so it is going to be, it is recorded, it's being recorded, it's been recorded, and yes, you will have access to all of that. All right, let's see here. I'm going to change my view. And let me introduce Scott. We did this on the video too, but while it seems, Scott, that we're going to have a problem with Ken.
Yeah, it looks like he's not going to be, I don't know what's going on with him. So sorry about that, but we'll make it
okay.
great regardless.
So let me at least pull up the video, but I'm going to let you, Scott, introduce yourself. And everybody, if you don't mind turning off your videos, that would be great. And that way I am going to pin Scott's video for this little bit. Scott and I have known each other for a number of years now, and I've always been impressed with his knowledge base and also his willingness to share. And so again, you know, we'd finally decided, it's been way too long, Scott, honestly, since we should have done this video. So I'm really glad that we ended up doing it. I'm really glad that we decided to do the webinar so people could ask their questions. But again, Scott Smith with Royal Legal Solutions, he has been a part of my tribe and in my world. He actually set up my DST for me many years ago. So I'm actually going to let you, Scott, take it away and just kind of give a little, even though we do this on the video as well, I'm going to let you give a little bit of who you are and who your team is and what you do while I'm looking for this video. Okay. So everybody,
awesome.
Scott Smith, Royal Legal Solutions.
Yeah. Woo! I know everybody's clapping behind the mics, but it's all right. Yeah. So guys, a little bit about me. And understand like what it is that I'm doing with Royal Legal Solutions. And it's a little bit different than what I'll cover in the video here. But also I'll give you like one level deeper actually before we start is I ended up hitting my financial freedom from real estate investing after getting into my first property when I was in law school, got hooked on real estate and never stopped, right? And I never actually had intention to actually ever start a law firm, which is now turned into essentially a family office, but for the average real estate investor. We're in-housing everything from tax attorneys to asset protection attorneys to CPAs, MBAs, legal strategists, as well as financial strategists, and continuing to just spin up a spider wheel in this quest to be able to find what is a true one-stop shop that can cover off on everything that would come into a real estate investor's life. Our belief as a company, and what spurns me on to be able to do this type of work is I have a fundamental belief that life starts happening on the other side of financial freedom. When we remove the financial pressures from our life, we're actually stuck with really hard questions. Like, what is it that I want? And what is it that I want to give to the rest of the world? And I believe that the more that me and my company can be successful with facilitating and accelerating people's lives to that point, the better off we all become. Because when we have that kind of space in our lives, that's when we're able to go look at how do we improve our families and our relationships, our communities, and ultimately where we go as a country. So in a sense that may seem strange to you, running this company and building Royal Legal Solutions is actually the way that I feel like I can do the most good. And so what we do is we have a company that's based around giving away as much education as we possibly can for free on all of the topics that we think are most critical for people in their pursuit of financial freedom. And it's a one-of-a-kind type of experiment. Nobody else has tried this that I can find in the world yet to try to build a business that's based upon these kinds of principles. So we have, now we're on to 7 live shows a week that are free for everybody to join, that are very similar to the format that what we're doing here today, that specializes in different asset classes, as well as generalized portfolio investing, like legit tax strategy sessions with Q&A with all of our existing customers and new people looking to come check us out. And we don't profess to know everything, but we are in the pursuit of learning as much as we can, and knowing that it comes from a communal wisdom, and facilitating a communal conversation with communal wisdom is where we actually all grow to the next level. So that's just a little bit off my heart about the things that I'm about. And you're going to hear a little bit different introduction here in this video, which is actually my story through real estate investing and in building Royal Legal Solutions.
Yep, absolutely. So without further ado, everybody, I've got it all queued up and ready to go. Hopefully, when I start playing, if you don't mind just giving me a little thumbs up or a yes, a Y in the chat box that you can hear, because again, I wasn't quite prepared for this. So hopefully we have no glitches. But just let me know that you can hear and see the video recording okay. And we're going to get started. And again, remember to write down your questions, because as we go through, you know, this is something that we wanted to address and make sure that you get all your questions answered tonight. So, all right, everybody, here we go. Let me start to share my screen in a moment. And Scott, you may want to turn off your video as well, and I will as well, for the time being at least. Okay, everybody should be able to see my screen, hopefully. Make sure.
Hi everyone, Paige Panzarello here, the Cashflow chick, and I am so excited to be here today because
Paige, I think we lost the audio. It was working, but it looks like it's
There we go. Is that better?
Specifically, we're going to focus on some highly specialized
Yep, we're good.
structures, which is a little different and outside the box of the normal investing and investor type mindset. So I'm really pleased to introduce all of you to Scott Smith of Royal Legal Solutions. And I'm going to give him the floor and let him tell you about himself and how he started and why he started Royal Legal Solutions. So everybody, Scott Smith.
Paige, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. We've been working together for a long time now, and I, of course, my background, of course, is in asset protection, estate planning, and tax. I'm an attorney as well as real estate investor, and I actually started when I was in law school, and I ended up making more money doing real estate than I was practicing as an attorney suing insurance companies. So my journey through it was first through my financial freedom through real estate until people started asking me for help about, hey, what are you doing for your asset protection? What are you doing for your estate planning? What are you doing for your tax? And so as I just started to help some local people, quickly, I realized that the need all across the country was severe, and what help people were needing in these areas, because they were tired of having to talk to a bunch of different professionals and quarterback it all themselves and figure it all out. So that's what I've done, is create a one-stop shop in Royal Legal Solutions. So that way everybody can have a single point of contact for all of the critical pieces of their life, from people that understand real estate because they're real estate investors themselves, and also professionals of CPAs, MBAs, investors, etc. So that's kind of where we grew now. So now we help people in all 50 states, every asset class. We have about 40 employees, 5 attorneys, 12 paralegals, robust team. We are just excited to be able to help people that have notes into it, because note investing is so important. It's such a powerful investment tool. And that's one of the reasons, Paige, why I wanted to come and sit with you here today, because I've always known your work inside of the note space to be so strong for so many years, with so many of your clients that I had the opportunity to meet and watch them be able to thrive in their note investing for all that time. So I was kind of curious here, like kicking off into 2 pages, what is like the secret sauce that you think that you bring into the note space that allows so many of your students to be successful, to the extent that they need to start protecting their assets, and they need to start thinking through their taxes and like these advanced types of strategies that Royal Legal Solutions specializes in?
Yeah, so as you know, Scott, you and I have been working together for 6 years. And even though I've been in real estate and real estate investing for over 25 years and done just about everything there is to do in real estate investing, I landed in the note space. And when I got here, I realized that even though I had been set up in terms of my entity structure for other types of real estate investing, I realized that I needed something a little different for the note space. And the bonus is that it ended up spilling over into other forms of real estate investing and offering me those protections. So for me and the secret sauce, when I started teaching about notes and note investing, if I'm going to teach somebody how to fish, I'm going to give them all of the tools, right? I'm not going to hold something back. And entity formation and structure for your asset protection is a big piece of that. And so when I saw you and started working with you, 6 years plus ago, I thought, why not bring Scott in to my students as well to offer the same opportunities and asset protection that's so important to me. It should be as important to them. And so it's been a really great collaboration. I'm excited that we're here today to really start talking about it, because as you know, when I do my workshops and teach about note investing, I also touch on it, but you're the expert. And so when it comes time for my students, I refer them to you because I have, personal experience with you. You are the one that set up my entities and my structures to be able to do my note investing. And so that's why, in any type of real estate investing or anything really, Scott, you know as well as I do, collaboration with people that you know, like, and trust is hugely important. And so that's why we're here. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it, because I think that there's so much value to be gained by getting educated on these topics. I run into clients every day who are, everybody's always thinking about, what am I going to do with my money, right? Does my money need to go into buying a new asset, or where do I need to start investing the money? And I think as real estate investors overall, this is always a critical question for us, because what is the investment that you make inside of a better tax strategy, right? That's another way of making money, is by saving money from taxes, right? And a lot of the same work that we do, Paige, and I remember from our conversation, you started out was, well, how do you make sure you don't end up with big steps backward, right, from lawsuits? Because in lawsuits, you can get sued for an infinite amount of money. And that if you have everything in your personal name, which is the absolute worst way you can possibly own things, a single lawsuit can wipe you out for your entire net worth. And I remember that was important for you, especially when I was telling you about my friend who had lost over $3 million in real estate from a single lawsuit. And he's very well insured. And he thought, well, I have all this insurance and I'm great. But what he didn't realize is that people will sue you for all kinds of things. They will sue you for any breaches of contract. They'll sue you for emails that you sent, and none of those are covered by insurance. So we really have to be careful about what are the risks that we're taking as we're on that journey to financial freedom, to make sure we don't have the big missteps, which means saving money on taxes so you have more money to invest, and investing in the knowledge that it takes to be able to do that, as well as investing in the right foundations of your house, so that way you don't build this big, beautiful house on sand and all of a sudden it comes collapsing down around you.
Exactly. And that's a huge thing. And especially for notes, because notes are that there are ways that you can get caught up in, if you own a bunch of notes under one umbrella, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, how detrimental that possibly could be for you. Also, we're going to talk a little bit later on about, most of us kind of cap out at how much money we have to invest. And so we often seek other people's money. So when we're doing that, there's exposure for them, exposure for you. And so we're going to kind of talk about how potentially these couple of structures might help you to ward off of some of that exposure. So let's get into it, Scott. Let's first start out by talking about, why should somebody invest as an entity structure as opposed to individually, or perhaps even just a family trust?
Yeah, so the important piece that I always look at when I was starting my real estate investing journey is I wanted to find out, what did rich people do? And be like, maybe I should copy what rich people do. Maybe there's some clues to success and what's been able to get them to where they're at. And one thing I noticed is that what rich people do is always make sure they don't have backslides in what they do. And they also don't own anything. Rich people have entities, and those entities own everything. When I came to realize that, I was like, oh, well, that's because you as an individual owning stuff, right, means that anytime you're making a communication to anybody by email, phone calls, in person, anytime you're signing contracts, anytime you're driving your car, it could be the event that spurns a lawsuit. That means that somebody will sue you for everything you're worth. So it's important that you don't own anything, that you have entity structures that own stuff, so that way people sue you, you don't care, right? And that's a great peace of mind to be able to know that's true. Other people that we've worked with have said, well, I got everything inside of like a living trust or a family trust. They say, well, they mistakenly think that like any type of trust is protected. And that's not the case. Some trusts offer asset protection, meaning if I sue you or sue the trust, like what do I get? I could get everything. So no asset protection means I can still sue you and get to everything that's signed in your family trust. Asset protection tells you that if I sue you, I can't get to your stuff. So it's important for people to know that, say, great, well, with the family trust, the living trust, you've accomplished an estate planning purpose for how you're going to pass assets to people when you die, but all of the assets are still exposed, that if anything happens to you, they can still get to all of those assets. So you actually need some type of corporate structuring, whether that's going to be a series LLC, an LLC, or a Delaware statutory trust, an irrevocable trust. There's a lot of different options that are out there. Some of them are better from others, depending upon what objectives you're trying to reach. But you really need both. You need your family trust and your living trust for your estate plan, and you also need asset protection vehicles to protect you from lawsuits and hold all of your assets anonymously. So you look like you qualify for food stamps, because people that look like they qualify for food stamps don't get sued.
There's a lot of truth to that. Wasn't it Rockefeller that said, own nothing, control everything?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you control things through your corporate entities, right? But you don't own any of the assets anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned a couple, obviously, again, we've all heard about LLCs and also corporations, both C corporations, S corporations. There's tax benefits, obviously, to both or all. And I know a lot of investors, especially those that are buy and hold investors, that will set up a different LLC for each house that they buy. Well, that can get, especially if you live here in California, that can get very, very expensive in terms of the franchise tax board fees. Typically, it's a minimum of $800 per year per entity. So if you have 10 entities, you're looking at $8,000 a year minimum. So outside of those two, I kind of prefaced this call today with, we've heard about LLCs, we've heard about S corporations. You mentioned a series LLC. So what is that? Tell us what a series LLC is and maybe some of its advantages.
Sure. Well, a series LLC has been around for about 20 years, a little over 20 years. And what that is it's a solution to the problem of being really expensive and cumbersome to own a bunch of LLCs. If you've ever thought about owning a bunch of LLCs, you're like, man, not only are the upfront costs for each of these LLCs expensive, but then I have to pay for registered agents. I have to pay for the corporate compliance to do the minutes, do the annual filings every year. If I'm living in California, I have to pay these huge franchise taxes. In other states, you still have to pay yearly fees. Sometimes those are as little as $75. Sometimes they're as much as $600 to $800, depending upon which state you're in. LLCs themselves provide great asset protection. You can have great asset protection using LLCs. You can use Wyoming LLCs to be able to have an anonymous LLC if that's structured properly. And you can use all these other individual LLCs and hold one asset per property. And that will give you great protection because it'll compartmentalize every asset from the lawsuit, meaning if they sue one entity, they can't get to any of the other assets and they can't get to you personally. But the problem is that it's expensive and it's cumbersome, it's time consuming, and the bank accounts are a headache to manage and the accounting books are a headache to manage. So yeah, you accomplished great asset protection, but you did it in a really expensive way, right? On both time and money into it. So the series structures are a solution to that problem. So the series structure, what it allows you to do is you create one parent entity, and then that parent can have as many children as it wants, just like any other parent, right? Those children don't cost you anything to create, right? And they don't cost you anything to maintain, but they provide the exact same protections as an individual LLC. Now, they're not an LLC. They're technically a child series of the parent entity. But the way the statutes are written, they have the exact same protections as if they were an LLC. So for 49 states, we'll use the series LLC for clients because it can effectively compartmentalize and hold anonymous all of their assets. And for California, people with California assets or California residents, we want to avoid that franchise tax. So we use a different structure called a Delaware Statutory Trust, which functionally works exactly the same. Both of them do, series LLCs as well as Delaware Statutory Trusts. But one, you get to avoid franchise taxes, which happens to be really important in California. So our California investors really like using that DST.
Yeah, and I'm one of those California investors. Again, you know, I heard you speaking 6+ years ago, and I said, that's what I want to do. Specifically, and specifically for notes, everybody, because again, you're going to buy more than one note in your lifetime, you know, hopefully. And as such, you want to be able, especially if you take on other JV partners, you want to be able to compartmentalize not only the asset, but also your arrangement and your agreement with your joint venture partner. And so one of these two structures, if you're in a state that allows and recognizes the series LLC, which again, California, it doesn't operate here, it's too cumbersome. So you go with the DST, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. You know, but it's one of those situations where you're kind of putting not all your eggs in one basket, but you only have to manage one structure that has its individual children, like Scott said. So Scott, let's talk about, you mentioned the Delaware Statutory Trust. I did too for California. Yes, it functions the same way, but what's really the difference here? How is it different than a series LLC?
Yeah, so the Delaware Statutory Trust, so we'll call it internally a DST. It's technically a trust structure. It's formed under the laws of the state of Delaware by statute, right? So we call it'd be another way to refer to it would be called a statutory trust because it has to conform to certain laws and certain filings for that. Now with the DST, just like any legal entity, I'm sure you've heard of like Delaware LLCs being filed in Delaware and used everywhere else. You can do that with any legal entity per the full faith and credit clause of the United States Constitution. Constitutionally, the states are required to recognize each other's laws. That also applies here to entity structures. So we can form a Delaware Statutory Trust in Delaware and then be able to use that inside of California. Now for California law, it's fantastic because California law says only LLCs are subject to franchise taxes, not the DSTs, structured properly and used appropriately as a trust. So there's some caveats to make sure you're doing that correctly, but that's what you pay for when you're working with experienced professionals, is how to make sure that that's going to play out if it's ever reviewed. That's why people pay us the bucks, right? To go with it. The great part about it though, is that everything in your life with a DST becomes streamlined and works functionally almost exactly the same way it is now for you. So you can hold all the assets anonymously. You can compartmentalize them. So if there's ever a wrongful foreclosure issue brought up or a serious interest issue, anything that would happen with your notes or any type of lawsuit regarding any individual pieces of real estate or apartment complexes or anything else you might own, the most they're going to be able to get is that one asset. Now, your operations with the DST are super simple. Everything can flow through a single bank account with a single set of accounting records where you just classify or otherwise just note what are the income and expenses of the individual notes or the properties that are underneath it. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So you end up with one bank account, one EIN number, one set of accounting books. You end up with an entity structure that is able to be passed through for tax purposes. So it can all just get reported onto your personal income tax return. You don't have to pay for a separate entity return that could be expensive for you. And it's infinitely scalable and it's at no additional cost. So it doesn't cost you anything more the bigger you get. So you can establish one foundational entity for what you have now, have a really streamlined way of operating it and reporting your taxes off of it. That'll be the exact same way you're doing them now. And you'll have an infinitely scalable infrastructure that won't cost you any more time and money as you scale, right? As you go through with it. And so that's what I think makes it really an ideal structure for so many investors out there.
Absolutely. And I have found it to just be exponentially helpful in my business specifically, you know, again, because I buy many assets. I'm able to protect them and my JV partners. I do have JV partners that I work with. Same thing. So, you know, I have found it to be just an amazing structure for me. The other thing is too, is that you can get creative, right? With how you structure it. Scott said that it's a trust. And so it flows through to your personal income taxes. I can tell you that personally, the beneficiary of my Delaware statutory trust is my S corporation. So talk to us a little bit about that. How does that work, Scott?
Yeah, so that's where we start layering in different types of tax strategies, right? So all the corporate entities that are out there, LLCs, C Corps, S Corps, DSTs, they all provide some type of protection that they do, right? It depends on where you form to the extent of how strong those are. So there's particular states that you want to form in that have something that's called charging order protection. But all of them serve that function in theory, right? To one degree or another. When you start layering in things like, well, I want to have an S corporation as part of my overall plan for what I'm doing, what we're saying is, hey, there's income here that we want treated through an S corporation for tax purposes. So the great part about the DSTs or the series LLCs is that it's all passed through and disregarded for tax purposes. So anything that your current CPA or your current tax advisor is doing, they'll still be able to do and have 100% flexibility of how they want the money to get to you. What'll happen though is before the money gets to you or whatever we're going to do with the money, we might need to channel it through certain corporate entities for certain tax benefits that we're looking for, right? So for example, like having it channeled through an S corporation makes a lot of sense if you're trying to avoid self-employment tax. It's one of the ways that you can avoid self-employment tax. Other times people will channel the income through an S corporation because they want to open up a solo 401k to protect up to $61,000 a year from taxes by opening up their own retirement account with their own company that they solely own, and they can push in that extra money there. So those types of entity structures and retirement accounts come into the broader map of what's going to be the most efficient tax play for us. What are we trying to come after in terms of maximizing cash flow versus total net worth? And those types of considerations are part of the advisory process that we help walk people through to be able to dial in. Okay, well, great. Well, what are going to be the tax efficient as well as operationally efficient, as well as the asset protection efficient types of solutions?
So let me ask you this. Can you invest in both of these entity structures, you know, the Series LLC and the DST? Can you invest in different types of investments? How does that work?
Yeah, so the DST is exclusively for buy and hold investments, right? And once you start looking to say like, hey, I'm doing like some fix and flips, or I'm otherwise running like an active business, that's not appropriately structured inside of a trust. That's appropriately structured inside an LLC. So yeah, you can use the Series LLC or the LLCs for any of your active types of businesses, but anything that's considered like a passive, meaning a year or more hold time for an asset, would be fine and appropriate to hold inside of the DST. Now, one of the things that you mentioned here, Paige, that's really important is about like what happens with my partnerships, right? A lot of your clients that'll come in will say, hey, great, well, I got this DST and I have two of my notes that are my own, and then this third note that I'm buying, I want to own it inside a partnership. How can I do that? And so, great, well, child Series A, you own wholly owned child Series A. You wholly own child Series B, and it owns a note. Now, child Series C, it's going to own a note, but child Series C is now not going to be wholly owned by the client. It's going to be wholly owned by the client and the investor in some context. Now, that individual child series will then have its own tax return. It's like just as like it was a partnership, any other partnership in like an LLC, it'll have its own filing that it has to do because now it's a partnership. You got to alert IRS that there's money being generated here and divvied up to a number of people to tell IRS, hey, make sure to go over there to look for your money. Don't look at it from me coming into it. And that's the way you can do it, these series entities, because the individual child series can be owned by multiple partners, just like they were individual entities. You can actually have a single parent structure that you start. Some of those can be individual and some of them can be you and partners. And I would only add a caveat to that is that, hey, if you're going to have 5 different assets with the same partner, you might want to start a DST solely for that partnership. Because remember, each child series that has partners in it has to file its own separate tax return. So at some point here, the cost of preparing the tax returns equals the cost of a new entity structure. So if it's just like a one-off with that partner, great, just use a child series and do that. If you're like, hey, I'm going to do like 5 different ones with these guys, then great, let's go ahead and move it into its own DST. So that way you're not having to file 5 different tax returns effectively for the same partnerships, because you have to file a tax return for child series C, child series D, child series E, et cetera, that you have with those other partners.
Yeah, and you know, again, the DSTs work a little bit differently in that the cash, you know, the money comes in and flows out to the beneficiaries. So it, you know, again, you're going to talk to Scott, you're going to talk to your tax professionals about, you know, the right entity structure for you. And what I have found, and kind of going back to the child, the ownership is a little different. You know, you talked about series A and B being owned by me individually, or the investor individually, you know, whoever your client is individually. But when the client brings on a JV partner, now we have series C, right? And what happens, everybody, is that in that series C, you as one of the JV partners and your JV partner, their entities are, you're going to own 50% each beneficial interest in that series. Okay, so both of your entities are going to have beneficial interest in that series. So that's, you know, makes it beautiful in that you have one parent entity, but you're also securing your JV partner's interest because they themselves are going to have beneficial interest in that series. Is that correct, Scott?
It's 100% right. So you're not just protecting yourself, but you're protecting both of you, and having that type of formality in place. And it's also important, you know, to look at that in the context of like, well, if you own that note directly inside of y'all's personal names, what that would mean is that if either one of you were involved in a lawsuit, they could come after the underlying asset for what it would be, right? So having it held inside of an entity structure protects you from the liability your partner might be bringing to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it offers protection for you. It offers protection for them. It actually offers protection from other assets that either of you own as well, because you're only going to really focus one asset in that little series. I will say that sometimes I have 2. If it's the same JV partner, I'll have 2 assets in that one series, but that's it. No more than 2. So,
that's right. Yeah, you got to find that best fit line between what's going to make the operations work for us versus what's going to be the investor. Because I mean, that was one thing that was so important to me in starting Royal Legal Solutions. I looked out there and I said, man, there's a ton of things people can do, but they're not all efficient. They don't all make sense for real estate investors, or, you know, they're either, you know, too low, which is, I just got insurance and I feel like I'm good, I'm not going to worry about it. Or people were like, I need offshore trusts. And I was like, no, there's cost and operationally effective solutions to put in at whatever level you're starting at, right? And I think that's what's really important for people to really wrap their mind around, is that you want to start with the end in mind, but you want to start at a place that you can start taking action, right? Where most people fail is that they don't take any action. And if you can start building the habits and the processes around what wealthy people do and how wealthy people operate their businesses, you set the foundations and the habits and the rhythms that are the true foundations of wealth, right? And so it's all about how do you get into the right behaviors and the right mindsets and the right tools and the right team. And there's an appropriate level for everybody to be able to do that. And that includes people as individuals. It includes people that are really big into partnerships, right? There's always going to be a right fit. And that's one of the things that I love about the way that we structured everything at Royal Legal, such that you can start at any level and you can build on it like Lego blocks over time. So you're never in a position to have to tear it all down and restart again. And that everything is really flexible on the tax front and really flexible with what kind of deals you might want to get into and how, because those were important for me as an investor. So that's the way I designed the support teams and all of the structures is to be able to make it where I would have the best flexibility for what the deals I wanted to get into. And now people that come and work with us are able to benefit from all the hard work that I had to put in to figure that out for myself.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that was a key piece too, because, and you mentioned this in the beginning, you know, you said that we have to, there's so many different aspects when you get into real estate investing, you have to put so many different professionals in place and you have to go searching for them. So that was one of the things that I really appreciated about Royal Legal Solutions is that you do have it in-house. You don't have to go out to, you know, 5 different places to try and put all of these things in place. And so that makes it very convenient, very efficient. And kind of as a last thing, I do want to talk about scale. You mentioned scaling. So are there any limitations, by the way, before I get to scaling, are there any limitations to what a DST or a series LLC can actually do?
The only limitations are DSTs can't do active businesses. That's the only thing that you have to be cautious of. Is that if you're, and otherwise for anything that's active, you use an LLC structure, but that's really it. Otherwise, you should feel comfortable using a DST and for anything that you want to do that has asset holding that's intended to be for a year or more.
Yeah. Okay. So more toward the cash flow side of things, right? Passive, more passive, not nearly as active. And Scott said earlier, active is more toward the fixing and flipping. And the DST is, you know, inactive, passive is more buy and hold properties, notes, things along those lines. So
yeah, and just to be clear too for everybody here too, is that we're talking about assets, but really it can be anything inside your DST, right? It could be your stock accounts, it could be your cash that you have, it could be like your card collection, anything can be held inside of the structure. The idea is that you don't own assets anymore, but that your structure does own everything that would have any value to it. And that the series structure is so important for so many reasons, right? And one of the things I'll share with you, just a quick story on it, was actually a lawsuit that I had to defend. I'm defending about a lawsuit a month, right? With the structures that we put together for people. So everything that we do is really well tested from a litigation perspective. And in this one instance, Paige, what happened was that there was an asset that ended up getting sold outside of the series structure, and then the people that bought the asset, it was a little different than they thought it was going to be, right? And they were claiming that it was $75,000 in damages they were going to sue my client for, based upon some email exchanges that went back and forth that they said was fraud, right? And what happened is that because the asset got sold to them out of the child series of the DST, there was no other assets inside of that child series. So if they tried to sue the entity that sold them the asset, there's nothing there for them to collect against. If they tried to sue my client based upon the representations she made in the emails, all of those came from her completely separate LLC, which we call an operating company, which is where it's basically your face to the world that doesn't own anything but does everything for you. Well, those came through that entity. So if they were like, well, we're going to sue you based upon the representations you made, well, great, you can sue that LLC, but that LLC doesn't own anything. So in either way they tried to go in the lawsuit, there is no recovery of any dollars. So we got a $75,000 lawsuit dropped purely because of the structure. The facts actually didn't matter at all. And that's actually what we want. That's what good lawyering sounds like, is that we don't have to care about the facts, that we win based upon the process and the structure. And that's the pieces that I focus so much on from my litigation experience, knowing that how critical that is to be getting lawsuits dropped and before they even really start.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, everybody that is listening is going to always behave above board. So the facts, you know, you have facts to stand on as a foundation, but hopefully, you know, that's always subject to interpretation,
well,
right? I mean, you're a judge or a jury.
Let me put a keynote into this page, is that
Yes.
here's why. I know what you're saying, which is like, well, are we trying to encourage people to do stuff that's shady? And the answer to that is no. If you do stuff that's intentionally shady, those intentional acts won't protect, the legal structures won't protect you. But I will tell you that it doesn't matter how honest you are, because the other people on the other side, if they feel hurt or damaged in some way, they will just lie.
Everybody just lies in litigation. They'll lie the most they possibly can to be able to win. And it's a really nasty business. And so the way you get out of that push-pull emotional game is to have the right structures in place, because once the lawsuit gets filed, the fight and the lies and all of that starts, but also it starts as the attorney fees. So even if a lawsuit gets filed and dropped, it's going to cost you $5,000. So investing inside of the right structures to make sure that lawsuit never gets filed in the first place protects you from the claim, right? But it also protects you from the loss of people even thinking they're going to be able to get something from you.
Yeah. And, you know, not just the financial loss, we're talking time, stress, energy, all of that stuff. So, you know, what Scott is saying is just hugely important. So thank you for touching on that. I appreciate it, because it is, for those of us that become an attorney's client, you know, the attorney is the third party. And while they are involved, the emotions of it, it's your job to keep us in check for not having these emotions and the stress. But that's easier said than done, right, Scott?
I've never seen anybody do it. But actually, they rate lawsuits as like one of the top 3 most traumatic things that can happen up to you, along with like divorce, right? What seems to happen is that if you're sued, is that you go into a complete fight or flight response, and it hijacks your brain and your energy about this threat that's coming after you. That's an unknown threat of an unknown size. So the right legal structuring protects you from that occurrence. Even if you can win the lawsuit, for some people, it shuts them down completely for 6 months to 2 years in some cases, right? Where they just can't think of anything but this lawsuit, even though they can't do anything about it, right? So that's why I think it's really important for us to make investments inside of the right strategies, because it's the only way that you can continually take steps in your net worth that are up and to the right, and that your life keeps getting better without the ability for other people to come in and hijack your life, right? By whatever they're doing, right? So if you want control of your finances and control of your life, these are the ways that you go about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you sleep at night, you know, when you put it in
Right.
place properly, you sleep at night. So last little thing, let's talk about scalability. I said I was going to come back to that. So talk to us about how either of these structures is scalable as you grow as an investor, because we all do.
Yeah, it's really simple, actually. So all of the child series documents are able to be templatized along with the operating agreements with them. And so for some of our clients, they want us to produce those documents. That's great. Other people want us to be able to produce templates that they can self-manage their own entity of creating new child series for the DSTs. What the beautiful part about this is you can actually create the child series on your own desktop and sign it, and now it's legally enforceable as a document. So there's no additional filing that has to happen, no additional fee that has to happen to be able to produce a new child series. And because, you know, and after you go through A through Z with your initial set of child series, right, you can go back and say, now I want child series AA, double B. You can name these childs whatever you want. And usually the alphabet is a typical naming convention. So it's really infinitely scalable at no additional cost to you, and you're able to manage it all yourself once you're properly trained.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's huge too, because again, you're not running around trying to set up all these different structures over and over and over and over again, you know, trying to grow your real estate investing business. And now you're having to worry about that as well. So let me ask a little bit about costs, because there are some different costs associated with a series LLC versus a DST. So what's the difference there?
Usually DSTs are a little bit more expensive to be able to put together. Typical ranges for DSTs are typically around $4,000 to $7,000, depending upon the complexity that ends up coming with them. Series LLCs, when you combine them with anonymity, are less, right, than the DSTs. The DSTs are arguably better protection, right? Trusts are typically considered to be stronger entities, not just from the asset protection and the lawsuit side of things, but also trusts are much harder to even serve with the lawsuit, because you actually have to find the trustees to sue them, right, with it. So there's other benefits to using a DST over the series LLC. What I can tell you is that on average, most clients that will come into Royal Legal Solutions
that will be looking for entity structuring and estate planning and tax, they typically will, if they can't afford it, will end up enrolling in everything. Because they'll say, great, I want to set the foundations for everything of my life. Of course, that's more expensive than people that are like, hey, I just need an individual LLC, right? And what's the efficient way to do that? Well, those costs can depend upon where we're filing the LLC, et cetera. And I can tell you that I'm really price sensitive to making sure that among top tier types of providers and professional firms, that we're at the bottom end of the top providers, right? So in the whole marketplace, we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but if you're really looking for that type of elite type of service, the elite type of strategic planning, then we would be the people to go with.
Yeah, and I found that to be true as well. Again, I've been with you for 6 years plus, and I did a lot of my homework, prior to going with Royal Legal Solutions. But everybody, I want to say this: there are things that you can skimp on, right? I don't find Royal's pricing to be offensive at all. And there are things in this world that you can skimp on. This is your life. Quite literally, this is your life, your family's life, your legacy. You get what you pay for, right? So this is one of the things. Don't skimp on this part. Please don't skimp on this part, because it's hugely important for not only you and your investing, but also for your family and your legacy. And just, if you have to start slow, that's okay. Again, if you need to build up to, you might be in a state where you can do a series LLC. Eventually you want a DST. So start there, but don't skimp. Don't skimp on your asset protection, because it quite literally is the foundation for your life and your being here in this world, right? So you get what you pay for. And actually with Scott and his team, I feel that I actually get more than I pay for. So
I always hope that's the case, Paige, because we work with so many investors all over the country, is that as we learn more, the more we actually able to advise people and strategically. And I think that's one of the great things about being able to specialize in just this area of law with these types of investors and entrepreneurs, is that you don't just get to be able to have the legal and tax things, but we also get to advise on like, hey, this is what we see everybody else is doing right now. Right. And it gets you up to skill of, hey, what are the best practices and best strategies that are in play in the market right now? And we actively even teach on that on a weekly basis with a lot of our own internal group coaching. So we're education first types of people. So if this is something that you're interested in taking action on now, of course, we're happy to help you to be able to do that. If it's something that you want to learn more about, that's great, because we have the best education tools on the internet for giving away all of the secrets for free and walking people through exactly how you want to do it. So I think that, with that, you can take the steps now to get educated while you're trying to look at what are the financial investments I need to set the foundations for the rest of my life. And the great part is that a lot of these are one-time costs that you could say, great, over the course of 20 years, what did this cost me? $200, $300 a year, $500 a year, right? To be able to put that in place. And if this is, you're in the long haul for it, which you are if you're looking for cash flow, because that means you're long-term buy and hold, right? Then these are expenses that you say, nah, all right, this is a one-time cost, and I'll ride this into the sunset. This is going to be very affordable and a good investment taken in that light.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, like anything, any business that you start up, even if it's just passive investing, it's still a business. There are still startup costs that are associated with it, and do everything that you can, to protect yourself. And again, that's why we're here talking with Scott. Again, he is a giver. He does give his education away. It's unbelievable to me the value that he offers, not only his clients, but those that aren't even his clients yet. So with that said, of course, we're going to put Scott's contact information in the comment section, below this post. But Scott, how do people get in touch with you?
Best thing to do is to go to royallegalsolutions.com and click on the get a price or take the quiz buttons that are in there that will take you to a page where you'll be able to give us some basic information about you. That information that we're able to collect from you will take you maybe less than 5 minutes to fill out. But what that does is helps us build a profile of who are you and where are you trying to go. And that profile, we've actually created it to be able to then pair you with, out of the thousands of hours of videos and instruction we have, my team is able to pick out the discrete correct material for your situation of where you're at now and where you're going. And that's the value that we've been able to bring from working with so many clients for so long. And that's what the value of those questions are. So if you're looking for that type of curated content as part of your journey and to figuring out what the right thing for you to do is, then go to royallegalsolutions.com, take that quiz, get connected with the team. There's no obligation to do that, and they can start making the informational and educational recommendations to you until you're ready to take some action. So that's what I always tell my team. Our goal is to educate. Once people are educated and it's clear to them about what the future looks like, they'll buy from us to be able to execute on it. So all we have to do is be great and phenomenal educators and help people along that path. So that's the kind of experience that you should be looking forward to as working with us.
Yeah, and Scott and I, always like to know that we're reaching people. So don't forget to mention that you saw us on this webinar together. That we're, so we know that we're reaching people. As you know, everybody, for me, I'm passionate about people learning how to become financially free. And this is just another step for me to help you go in that direction. And I like to know that I'm helping you to get there as well. So make sure to let us know that you saw the webinar. Let Scott and his team know that he's doing his job in terms of educating. I'm doing my job in terms of educating, and that we're all going to be able to collaborate together as we go in our investing careers. So thank you for being here. Scott, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with my people, my tribe. I call them my tribe. And I'm really excited to hear that, that we are reaching people and that they are taking the steps to protect themselves, because as you know, we live in a crazy world, especially these times. But if they can take the steps up front, then they're going to be better off in the long run. So thank you. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Paige. My pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. See you next time.
Don't
Bye.
leave. Don't leave, everybody. Don't leave. Don't leave. We're still here. All right. So I'm glad that we got the video to work. Excellent. And there were some questions that came through, and I know Scott had answered a few of them, but here's what I'd like to do, Scott, just because, for the benefit of all, right? Because some people may not have had their chat up. So let's go over some of these questions. And I also want to talk about a little bit about, we talked about taxes, and there's some tax protections here. And again, everybody, talk with your tax accountant, talk with Scott. I will tell you that the way that I invest and the way that I am structured, because again, the trust structure flows in, the funds flow in through the child series, right? The child LLC or the child series of the DST. And then it flows up and out through to the beneficiaries. And so there are, for my accounting and my accountants, because typically my JV partners are entities and not persons, like people, then we are able to have that money flow in, flow up, flow out, and it's reported on our taxes, not as the series of the DST, however, as income that comes in, or however your accounting it structures it, as income that comes in to the beneficiaries of that DST. So there's some benefits there too. Now, again, I am not a CPA. Talk with your tax accountant. That's how my accountant advised me. But I do want to talk about that a little bit, maybe more, or if you have questions about that. But let's get to some of these questions. So Scott, you're still here, I assume. Yes,
I'm here. Yeah.
of course. Maybe there you go. So let's get to some of these questions. One thing, let me close that. All right, perfect. Let's see. Cindy had asked, can I transfer my existing LLC to a DST?
Yeah, good question. So the first question I always ask with people is like, what are you trying to accomplish? Right? Because the question of like, can you, like, sure. Like what situation would you want to do that? Right. So I'll tell you about like how this typically works if you have an LLC and you're thinking about a DST. If you have an LLC and you're thinking about a DST, what you're probably thinking about is, well, I have this one entity and what I'd really like to do is compartmentalize all my assets, hold them anonymously, and have an infinitely scalable company that doesn't cost me anything as I grow. That makes a ton of sense to me. I want to switch to a DST structure. So the thing to do is say like, great, well, let's just take all of the assets out of the LLC. We'll chop them all up in the DST. That's how we call compartmentalizing them, right? And now all the assets are held anonymously in this DST structure. You have one set of accounting books for it with one EIN number, one tax return, one bank account. Couldn't be more simple. In fact, your life is exactly the same as if you had an LLC with all of the assets in it than it was when it's with the DST, except with the DST, it's much more protected because they're all held anonymously and compartmentalized. So everything in your life stays exactly the same way it is right now. I know that sounds incredible. And on top of that, after you invest in the DST, you also end up with an LLC that doesn't own anything. You know what that's called? A shell company. And they're amazing. Because shell companies give you a barrier, a personal barrier between you and the rest of the world. And why is that great? It's because you're sending emails. It's because you're on the phone. It's because you're signing contracts. And all of those things are a basis for liability, where people have a great opportunity to say you lied to me, and therefore I'm going to sue you. And now we have to leave it to 12 random people, average Americans. I mean, have you met average Americans? Do you want them judging you on what it is? Like, it's incredible about what that is. This is the way the justice system works. And that's what you're exposed to, unless you have an LLC there that says, great, now that blocks any lawsuits because I didn't make the representation. The LLC made the representation. I'm an agent of that LLC. I can't be personally liable. So even if I don't own any assets, because they're all protected inside of the DST, I still have a credit score. And I want to have an LLC in place because I want all of the liability in my life to stop at LLCs. And I understand my credit score is an asset that allows me to get access to capital and buy additional assets, just like the assets themselves are income producing assets, right? So that's what I would say you would want to do. Strip all the assets out of this LLC, put it in the DST, use that LLC to now be your shell company. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, you have both of those entities owned by a single living trust as part of your estate plan. So all of your assets can avoid probate court and they all go directly to your heirs in a way that you can control.
Yep. And that's amazing. That is amazing. So, again, if you have questions about that, definitely reach out to Scott, set up a time to talk with him, and he'll get you taken care of. All right. Jason asked, one thing that makes me wonder, what is the advantages and disadvantages of having an LLC versus an INC? He has an LLC now, but he was wondering that most of his colleagues apparently are professional engineers and architects, and they are registered as incorporated. So Scott.
So there's two different pieces here to think about when you're talking about entity structure. One is what is the protection that it provides, right? The other part is what are the tax implications of that entity, right? And you have to think about both of them because you would want to layer them differently, right? So the thing to do is that you need at least two companies, right? You need one company, which in this today, we're talking about the DST, right? It's the strongest domestic asset protection type of company you can get with these types of trust structures, formed with incredibly strong laws. It's very well tested. The second type of company you need is what I was just talking about. That's a shell operating company that does all of your active businesses. The game that you play with taxes is this. You have a company that will have all of the possible legally reasonable types of expenses you possibly can getting into that company to be able to drive down the taxable income of what you have. Then those are called your deductions, right? Then what you'll have after your deductions is going to be like depreciation from your real estate or potentially other assets used against that income to further load the tax liability. Then you'll say, great, now I have a pool of money that I'm going to get taxed on unless I'm going to create my own retirement account, probably a solo 401k to get $61,000 of that income tucked away tax-free into it. But then I still have some taxable income left over at the end of the day. And now it's a question of how do I want to get taxed? And either you can choose to get taxed as a disregarded entity, as like from an LLC that would come in. If you do it that way, you have to pay self-employment taxes, but you don't have to file an LLC tax return. So you save some money on your tax preparation, but you'll end up paying more in tax because you end up having to pay the self-employment tax. Or you could decide to have that LLC taxed as an S corporation and avoid self-employment taxes and have about a 7% net deduction from your taxes if you use an S corporation. Typically, this always makes sense at around the $50,000 a year mark in total income from non-W-2 income. And then you'll say, well, great. Well, those S corporation deductions plateau out at around $130,000. So after that, you would want to use a C corporation that you can then have further deductions that are available to you because of the C corporation, that the corporate tax itself is going to be less than the marginal tax rates that you could get, given the fact that you won't be able to take advantage of the deductions from self-employment tax from the S corporation, right? So it has to do with how much money you have coming in, and then what your cost of the tax preparation is for that type of legal entity and the cost of that legal entity. And so if you can do some quick math on a spreadsheet, which is what we do with all of our clients as part of our, we have a $2,000 like tax strategy session where we map out all of your finances, all of your taxes, layer in all the strategies we know and give a side-by-side comparison of here's the cost to implement that tax strategy, projected tax savings, net worth impact, cash flow impact if you do nothing versus implementation. And that's the calculus that goes into it. So when you're saying like, why am I people doing this versus that, has everything to do with how much money they're making and what entity structures are going to be best for them.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Okay, another question from Michael. What about umbrella insurance? Where does that fit in?
So I saw a couple of questions in here about like CPAs and stuff too. I want to let everybody know that we do have a CPA division just to make sure. So umbrella insurance is the number one thing that you should always have, because umbrella insurance actually covers most all of the risks, most all of the time. And I think the debate always was, well, do I need asset protection or insurance? The answer is you need both, because insurance covers most of the risk most of the time. But what happens with that 10% of the time when insurance doesn't cover you? That's what happened to my friend, right? He had great insurance in place, but he got hit with something that was in that 10%. And so what he needed to do was at least have an LLC in place, and that would have got him to 100% protected, right? And the juice is always worth the squeeze on these kinds of things in this country that with the way lawsuits go.
Yeah, absolutely. Aylin has several questions. All right, so since it is a trust, what happens with EINs? That's the first question.
Yeah, you get them. I recommend them. You have to have them.
Yes.
So you'll have to get EIN numbers to open up a bank account. So those are just trust EINs. You can file those online with IRS. We always include it in everything we do because it's like a 10-minute thing. And what you'll do is you'll take the trust document and the EIN letter and go to your any bank that has a national charter. So it's all major banks essentially. And then they will be able to open up the trust account for you. So then you can hold all of your cash inside of your DST because you don't want it in your personal name, and you don't want it in your shell operating company because the shell operating company has all the liability because that's where you're doing everything. So you don't hold assets in it. You hold it in your asset holding company, which is your trust. And now your trust owns all of your cash. And then when you're paying things out, what you need to do is track any income and expenses you have with each asset, right? So if that was for real estate, it'd be like, okay, cool, I replaced the roof here, I have to tag it in my QuickBooks, that's where I went. If you're a note investor, you don't have that same type of issue, right? But you do need to classify when you get income into the account, right? it needs to go in the accounting records. This income is allocated to this entity, Child Series A, which owns that note. And then that way you can do two things. First thing you're going to want to do is to be able to track what's the performance of that note over time. So you can see a true ROI, because you're a great note investors. You learned from Paige that you have to track your data to know what your investments are worth. The second thing too, is it's required by law to be able to designate that each child series is truly a separate company. Right. And we know that because of the accounting records. So you're going to do it because it's good for you as an investor. And you're also going to do it because it's going to keep you protected.
What about an active company that does wholesaling and rehabs? How does that fit in, Scott?
Yeah, that's an active business. You just push in you create an LLC for the active business and run all of the active business out of that LLC. And then any assets are always going to be held in your DST, and then they'll be leased to the active company. So if you had like vans, for example, because you're a home inspection company, we'd say, great, take all the vans, put them into the DST, run your home inspection company in a completely separate LLC that's not associated with the trust. And then you'll lease your vehicles from your asset holding company. So that way, if your active company gets sued, we just shut the company down and start up a new company, right? And because we didn't lose in the assets, we're back in business in the very next day.
This is a great question. Would the banks and traditional mortgage companies, in essence, recognize them and let you put them in a DST?
Yeah, so they're all recognized entities. What comes into play is, how do you get the very cheapest rates that you possibly can, right? When you're making investments with mortgages. So you can get mortgages inside of these vehicles, trust vehicles, but they're always at commercial rates with commercial underwriting practices that have to happen because of the entity structure. So the cheapest and easiest underwriting you can get when acquiring an asset is going to be in a single purpose LLC or in your individual name. So what we always tell our clients is, when you're buying more assets, we recommend making the most money you can, right? And then that is closing on the asset in one way, like say a single family home or a 1 to 4 unit property, and then transferring it into the trust structure. And therefore you can take advantage of the good financing and have the asset protection and the anonymity that the trust provides you. And the beautiful part is that you can't actually foreclose on a transfer of a 1 to 4 unit property into a trust based upon the what's known as a due on sale clause, which says you can't transfer an asset with a mortgage on it. We'll call the note due. But there's an act called the St. Germain Act that says there's an exception for a transfer of a 1 to 4 unit property interest. So if you have other assets, we can actually get you the best financing. And because of that law, be able to move it into an entity structure, which you wouldn't be able to do in any other way.
Yep, absolutely. And it's just like, before, a lot of people do that with just their family trust. Like they'll take their primary residence and put it into a family trust. Same thing holds true for here. So, all right, you guys, we are kind of running a little bit later than expected. So let's see, it appears, okay, Scott, there's one more question here. What about if you already have irrevocable living trust, land trust, LLCs for passive and active rehabs? Oh my gosh, this is a big long one. And also a solo K in an LLC that is owned by my LLC. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you need to come in for.
Yeah, let's let Aylin set up an appointment with Scott and his team and talk about that. That's a really kind of personal, single person question that's got many moving parts.
Well, like just
I
to
love
wrap
it,
up, because there's another question in here too that was about whether do all CPAs and attorneys know about this kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
Their answer is there's a handful, right? So like Tom Wheelwright, Anderson Advisors, those are groups that you would consider like competitors of mine that would be knowledgeable about these structures. The difference is for one reason or another, all three of us as leaders and organizations in this space disagree to some extent, right? So you will find that we all have different rationales of what are our prescribed ways that we do this. I can guarantee you though, that anybody that is not a firm that's exclusively looking at assets of real estate as an asset class as it relates to CPA functions, tax advisory, tax strategy functions, and asset protection is so far behind the ball, that it's not there, that's not a productive conversation. I would first just start with one of the three of us. I think that we are the best at all the education piece of it. Anderson is the biggest. They're 10 times bigger than us, and they really struggle, I think, for a lot of reasons because of that. But come in for us for the education. And all you have to do is just go into that link that I dropped there into the chat to be able to fill out the quiz that we have there, which is the way in which we're going to be able to get the basic information we need about you to be able to know what are going to be the top videos and resources that people just like you have found really valuable, right? We're able to make strategic content recommendations for you, and then also be able to have an opportunity to be able to look at what it would look like to go through a process with our team where we look at, hey, let's look at everything you're doing with your asset protection, your estate planning, and your basic tax strategies and retirement plans. Let's talk about if there's any additional tax support you need for filing returns, in-depth tax strategy. Maybe you want monthly meetings with our CPA, MBA, tax attorney, and strategic business advisory team, if you need that kind of coverage. Do you need help with your insurance? We have an insurance wing that we're developing right now too, to be able to cover off in those areas. So we'll be able to take you through a process of what you can feel like of a single quarterback walking you through every major gate of your business and being able to say, here's what the best practices are that we see time and time again for people that are just like you. And it all starts with the quiz. We need you to go fill out the quiz because that's what tells us what to talk to you about.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody, if you don't know how to save the meeting chat, what you can do is where it says, where you would normally post a comment, there's three little dots. If you click on those three little dots, it'll say save chat. So if you do that, then you will always have that link, at your disposal. And that way you can also reach out to Scott, but, preference is to click on it and get, at least have that URL so you can act quickly. Everybody, I really appreciate you being here. I hope that you found this to be valuable information. I've always enjoyed working with Scott, and as I've been scaling, he's also been scaling, which is really cool that we've been able to kind of collaborate together and move forward and together, in our scaling of our business and be able to reach more people and help more people. So again, when you set up your appointment, just let him know that you saw him here, that you're part of the Cashflow Chick tribe. And that way we all know that we're doing our job and helping you out. And I look forward to hearing your stories. Please, let me know what you've been finding when you start educating yourself about this stuff and how you're growing as an investor. I want to hear about it because you're my people, you're my tribe, and I want to hear from you. So any other questions before we sign off? It looks like we're getting a whole lot of thank yous and yeah, everybody, I can't wait to see you spread your wings and fly and really start protecting yourself, not only for yourself, but this is legacy, you guys. This is legacy for your family as well. So, make sure that you are protecting yourself on an ongoing basis as you grow as an investor. Michael asked, what state is Scott based in? He is in Texas. That's why you heard that, y'all.
Yeah.
You snuck one in there, Scott.
Oh, there it comes, man. The Texan comes out of me here too. But we also, just in case everybody's wondering too, we also help people in all 50 states and every type of asset class. And we have a team of 6 attorneys and about 12 paralegals and a huge support staff that goes behind it. And before we wrap up today, I just wanted to let everybody know too, that I've seen what's happened to the other 2 companies that I mentioned earlier, but where they've kind of lost control of the process, right? And where they've grown too fast or otherwise had to do things that we're not willing to do to outsource part of the work that they do. And what that has meant for us is that we're only going to take on so many clients. We're going to control our growth over time and ensure excellent client experience, even if it means we're not growing fast, right? With it. So I just want to let everybody know that, because by the time that you might be thinking, oh, I'll be ready for this in 6 months, we might be capped at how many people we're taking on for the year that would come with it. So if you want to get into the place you want us to have starting that conversation, I'm happy to start pairing you with information on everything at no cost to it. Education is always free in my world. But for those that are thinking about it, I really recommend taking the steps, fill out the quiz, and start the process. So that way you can have your place in line.
Yep, absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for being here, not only shooting the video, but being here tonight to answer everybody's questions. I know for me, even, I always pick up extra nuggets when I listen to you talk, and I wrote a couple of them down tonight as well. And everybody, make sure both Scott and myself are going to be posting this on our YouTube channels. So make sure to like it, and feel free to share it with others, because this is something that, especially in today's day and age, being such a litigious society and really wanting to have our sphere of influence and our people that are closest to us, we want to make sure they're protected as well. So feel free to share the video, like us on YouTube, of course, Facebook as well. And then reach out, of course, with any questions to Scott or myself, and I will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Oh, wait. Jason wants to know. Sorry, I was going to say bye. Jason wants to know the links on the YouTube. So Jason, for me, take a look at Cashflow Chick on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel. Of course, Paige Panzarello on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all those fun things is Cashflow Check. And for Scott? Royal Legal Solutions.
Royal Legal Solutions.
Royal Legal Solutions. Yep. So Cashflow Chick and Royal Legal Solutions, and we'll keep you up to date with all of our recent videos whenever we do videos. All right. I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.